The night Santa died, the night of Malus Claus. Christmas Eve in the isolated village of Frostbite felt almost magical. The cold air hung heavy with the scent of pine, and homes were wrapped in shimmering lights, their warmth visible through the frosted windows. It was the kind of place where the world seemed to slow down, where children eagerly awaited the arrival of Santa, and the night held nothing but hope. But in a cabin far from the village, hidden in the shadow of the mountains, two brothers faced each other. One was Santa Claus, the embodiment of generosity and joy, with a heart full of compassion and an age-old legacy that stretched across centuries. His eyes twinkled with kindness, and his smile was one of comfort. The other, Malus Claus, stood opposite him. His form was identical to his brother's, but his eyes were hollow pits, dark as the void itself. His grin was wide, sickening, full of contempt. Where Nicholas had embraced the spirit of giving, Malus had cultivated bitterness, jealousy, and a perverse desire for destruction. Tonight, brother, Malus sneered, your legacy ends. With a guttural growl, Malus lunged. In the dim light of the cabin, he used a bone saw to carve through Santa's flesh with brutal precision. Blood sprayed across the floor, staining the once pure white snow outside crimson. Santa's body slumped lifeless, the spark in his eyes fading into nothingness. Malus stood over him, panting. He stripped off his brother's blood-soaked red suit, donning it himself. As he adjusted the belt and hoisted himself into the sleigh, he let out a low, unsettling laugh that echoed through the still forest. The night had only just begun. Frostbite was quiet, peaceful even, as the clock struck midnight. Inside the Miller home, Mr. Miller sat beside the fire, enjoying a drink as his wife, Claire, and their two children, Sarah and Jake, slept soundly upstairs. The stockings were hung with care, and the tree shimmered in the warm glow of Christmas lights. Everything was perfect. But the first sign of something wrong came when the chimney emitted a strange noise, followed by the faintest jingle of bells. Mr. Miller turned to the fire, not realizing the figure descending the chimney was not Santa, but something far worse. Malus slid down silently. Emerging from the fireplace, he moved like a shadow, his twisted grin reflecting in the hearth's embers. Before Mr. Miller could react, Malus was behind him. With one swift motion, he slit Mr. Miller's throat, the blood spraying across the room in a horrific arc. His lifeless body crumpled to the ground with barely a sound. Upstairs, Sarah and Jake lay in peaceful slumber, unaware of the horror creeping toward them. Malus entered their room like a cold gust of wind, his presence a suffocating force. Sarah awoke to see the figure looming over her, his face a blank mask of darkness. She tried to scream, but he was quicker. Malus stuffed her Christmas stocking into her mouth, stifling her cry. With a cruel twist, he strangled her with the other end. Jake awoke to a muffled thud, his sister's strangled form lying motionless on the bed. Before he could call out, Malus drove an ice pick into his eye, piercing through his skull and ending his life in an instant. His body jerked, and then went still, a lifeless puppet. Claire Miller's scream echoed through the house when she entered the room to find her children slain. But the true horror awaited her as Malus turned, his eyes filled with sadistic pleasure. You'll be the final gift, he whispered. He didn't hurry the kill. Instead, Malus approached Claire slowly, savouring the fear in her eyes. With one brutal motion, he grasped her hand and twisted it, breaking her fingers one by one. She howled in agony, but he was relentless. He reached for a nearby knitting needle, using it like a dagger, stabbing her repeatedly in the abdomen. Her blood soaked the carpet as she fell, gasping for air, her body left to bleed out in excruciating pain. By the time Malus finished with the Millers, the village of Frostbite was already descending into chaos. His sleigh, driven by skeletal reindeer, took him from house to house. Each stop was marked by brutal, grotesque murder. He didn't just kill, he mutilated, leaving the families he slaughtered as twisted, violent displays of Christmas's dark side. No one was spared. The elderly, the young, the innocent. Each life was snuffed out in a horrific new way. The silence that followed each kill was deafening until only the smell of blood and death lingered in the air. There was no joy left in Frostbite, only a chilling, suffocating quiet. But not everyone was taken. At the edge of the village, a lone survivor, Megan, a teenager, hid beneath the floorboards of her home, paralyzed with fear. She had heard the screams, the grinding of metal, the sickening laughter of Malus as he passed by her window. Her parents were dead, but she was alive. She could barely breathe, her heart hammering in her chest. She clutched her phone in trembling hands, but there was no signal. Megan knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. With the sounds of sleigh bells and distant laughter still ringing in her ears, she crawled out from her hiding place and ran into the snow. But what she saw when she reached the village centre made her freeze. Frostbite was silent, the homes dark and empty, the bodies of the slain strewn across the streets. The once cheerful decorations now looked like a sick joke. And then, in the distance, Malus appeared again, his silhouette dark against the grey sky. He turned his cold black eyes toward her, and for the first time Megan realised that Christmas was no longer a time of joy or hope. It was a time of terror. As the first light of dawn broke across the snow-covered village, Malus returned to the North Pole, his sleigh now filled with the bloodied remains of his work. He didn't seek redemption, nor did he care for the spirit of Christmas. Back in the cabin, he hung Santa's lifeless body by the neck, an obscene ornament in the very home where he had once been born. He stepped back, admiring his work. This was no longer a world of peace and joy. This was Malus's Christmas. And each year he would return to ensure that the terror he had unleashed would never be forgotten. Years passed and the village of Frostbite was abandoned, its name whispered only in dark corners. The legend of Malus Claus spread across the world, a twisted myth, a warning of the true meaning of Christmas, something to be feared, not loved. And on every Christmas Eve, as the world donned its festive cheer, Malus would be waiting, in the shadows, in the darkness, for his next victim. Megan, now older and scarred by the memories of that night, had moved away, but she would never forget the feeling of Malus's eyes upon her. She couldn't shake the terror that still gripped her heart, for she knew that one day, one Christmas Eve, Malus would return for her. And when he did, there would be no escape.
Bloody Mary's Horror Stories. Watch, like and subscribe.